Hello, everyone joining us today. Hi, I'm Emma from Endometriosis UK. We're just going to have a couple of minutes while we let people join. Thank you to those of you who are very prompt joining straight away. So we will be starting shortly. I hope everyone's had a good day. There's quite a lot going on, obviously, around and about, and also for us, it's the beginning of Endometriosis Action Month. We renamed our Awareness Month Action Month because we do believe awareness is vital, but we want lots of actions to help people with endometriosis. So, and this is our first event of Action Month, which is really exciting. So as I say, we're just going to give it another minute or two to allow people to join, and then we will kick off. Normally I'd say do talk among yourselves, but obviously we're on a webinar, so can't do that in the same way, I'm afraid. I'm looking forward to when we do get to do face-to-face though, hopefully at some point. That'll be a great thing to do. So say just waiting for a few more people to join and then we'll kick off. Hi to everyone joining. We're just going to give a minute or two to let people log in. So thank you for joining so promptly. We will be with you shortly. And as I say, just waiting for a couple of people, a few more people to join up. Thank you. We've got quite a good number already. So what I'll do is I will just carry on and do some very important, but not always the most exciting thing, housekeeping, and then go through the agenda. So as I said, my name's Emma Cox. I'm Chief Executive of Endometriosis UK, and we have two very delighted we have both Saoirse and Caroline with us tonight to talk to us about various aspects of endometriosis and work in Northern Ireland. In terms of housekeeping, do please, if you want to ask questions, you can use the chat function. Can I ask that people keep them non-personal? We can't answer any personal individual questions, and so please do keep them generic if that's okay, and we will be allowing time at the end for questions, so do put your questions up as they go along. Then we will also, as I say, just in terms of the agenda for today, after I've finished doing this very brief introduction, Councillor Saoirse Eastwood will be talking to us about a view from the Northern Ireland Assembly. We have a lot of things happening today, and Naomi Long sends her apologies, but we're delighted that Saoirse is here to speak to us today, so thank you for that. We'll then, I'll talk a little bit more about the challenges that we see facing those in Northern Ireland with endometriosis with all the work we do at Endometriosis UK, and then Caroline will be talking to us about her personal experience and a view from the endometriosis community within Northern Ireland, and that should allow us with plenty of time for questions at the end. So as I say, do put those in the Q&A as they're coming along. I will add that we are recording this as well, so just for information. Anyway, so I think hopefully that's enough from me. So as an introduction, so what I'd like to do is put this hand over to Councillor Saoirse Eastwood. Saoirse.
Good evening. Thank you, Emma, and it's I'm sorry it's me instead of Naomi, but it's a privilege to be here this evening, and also to share the virtual stage with Caroline and everybody else. I'm just going to talk very briefly, and Emma, if you need to push me on, you just push me on. I suppose in terms of the context for this, to me, is a personal one. I don't have a formal diagnosis of endometriosis, but I do very much believe that I have it, as well as a number of other gynecological conditions that there would normally be a comorbidity with. This is a very personal issue to me, and I think over the years within the health agenda, within health policy, public policy, and how that impacts and informs and shapes what we as elected reps in Northern Ireland, both in the government, the Assembly, and also our MPs in Westminster, deal with. I think endometriosis is really one of those issues that has really gained strength in terms of those people campaigning And I mean, I remember 10, 15 years ago, you know, talking about it with family or friends, and people really had no idea. My first interaction with even having heard the word endometriosis was at Just 17 magazine in 1997, whenever I was in first year and got my first period. And it was absolutely horrendous. And unfortunately, that's been the way it has maintained for me. I didn't understand until much later on what it probably was. However, I couldn't take time out of my work. I was a manual worker, also a shift worker, and I couldn't afford to take the time off to get the surgery done with the laparoscopy to prove that this was actually a condition that I did have. And that is something that people need to take into consideration whenever we're talking about these things. By and large, whenever we talk about health policy and what shapes it and how it's informed, we look to data, and generally speaking within the health field, although I'm not a health professional, but in my job representing constituents, data is really important. It helps us make the case on behalf of constituents, and it enables health and social care professionals to plan and provide services. It also means that people who have endometriosis can actually be seen and be visible and really have their voices heard. In the last number of years, my colleague Paula Bradshaw, MLA, has been prolific in tabling a number of assembly questions on the issue of endometriosis specifically, and more wider gynecological issues. And as I can say, this is one of the issues that has really gained prominence, thankfully, in the last number of years. We know that in the last 3 years, there have been close to 3,000 people admitted to hospital who did also have a diagnosis of endometriosis. And that's really important. What I know from my own personal experience in dealing with constituents is endometriosis can so often be an undiagnosed and hidden condition. So if we know that at this point out, that if there are nearly 3,000 people who were admitted in the last 3 years, the number surely must be higher. And that recording of people who do have endometriosis is really important. We also know at present that there is no British Society of Gynecological Endoscopy accredited centre in Northern Ireland. There was a brief period of time where the Western Board did have that available to them. However, that fell away, and it is my belief and understanding that there is very much an impetus to try and get that set up again somewhere in Northern Ireland. And from any of the health professionals I've spoken to, that is something that they are absolutely dedicated to delivering. In terms of our party position, Alliance very much have a personal and party commitment to this. And as I say, that comes from lived experience. It comes from the experience of the likes of EndoPals, people right across Northern Ireland who have really informed this conversation from lived experience, but also how they work with people like Caroline and others who are actually working in the field to really not only provide a care and service for them, but also take that learning to inform how we actually operate our health service for those people that need that service. We also know that waiting list times, not just within this particular speciality, but generally across our health service, are the worst in the UK, with over 350,000 people waiting for a first consultant-led appointment in Northern Ireland. We know that that is something that doesn't sit well with health professionals, and it doesn't sit well with us. So the challenge to us is to really look at how we get to the place where we do have these specialist centres, or a mega clinic, if you want to use that phrase. We've seen that with a procedure centres set up across Northern Ireland. There's one in my own constituency of Lagan Valley, and that is doing really good work. And we would like to think that that would form the model of how we deliver these speciality services right across Northern Ireland. We also know that health is one of those things that does not follow a line on a map. And to that end, we are aware that there are cross-border workings going on in terms of meeting with MPs in England, and also our colleagues in the south as well. And it's really important that that cross-border element is taken into consideration as well, because that does impact on so many people in Northern Ireland. I have also partaken in the all-party parliamentary group on endometriosis in the UK, and that has been really informative as well. I think in terms of informing what we need to do next, we definitely need to start recording accurately, and that is a real challenge, because that's something that I know in terms of Encompass, where you look at that project that's going on within some of the health services, where that's looking at how data is recorded and shared and stored and transferred about the system, to put it in a better way, to inform that outcome for the patient. It's something that's really important. Just to finish briefly, obviously we've heard a lot about our primary care colleagues and how they've really been at the front line of a lot of this over the last 2 years, not just in COVID, but even before that, in terms of people coming to them unsure possibly of what they may have. They may be put down an IBS route, they may be put down another route. And so often I had the pleasure and the privilege of speaking to a number of medical professionals at the start of last year about how the lived experience of people with endometriosis can inform how they can maybe detect earlier on, or maybe be alert to some of the early signs and symptoms of endometriosis when they may not know what it is themselves. So there's a challenge presented to all of us there, elected reps, policymakers, people who are working in the field, and the campaigners who we all really owe a debt of gratitude to, who have worked so hard to put this issue on the table after so many years. And we really owe it to them. And certainly from our end, we will absolutely do everything we can to be their voice and continue to advocate for them.
Thank you. Thank you, Saoirse. That was really interesting, and I could have a very long conversation with you about data, and I'm sure we will at some point. Thank you for that. I'll move on now to talk a little bit about what we here at Endometriosis UK are the challenges facing those in Northern Ireland, and then Caroline will tell us what actually it's like on the ground as well after that. So I should say we have had an apology from the Minister of Health, Robin Swan, who had hoped to pop in today, but unfortunately can't, as well as Naomi. And he has sent us some information, so I might need to just read a few things out that he said, because we only just got details from him. So in terms of what's facing those in Northern Ireland is, well, I think Saoirse's highlighted as well, is even before the pandemic, we knew that there was really long waiting lists for some treatments in Northern Ireland around gynecology, and especially around diagnostic laparoscopy. Saoirse talked about the difficulties in actually getting the solid data, so it's really hard to find out who's waiting for endometriosis diagnosis, because until you have a diagnosis, you're not coded with it. But we do know, having spoken to people, that we were hearing of people who are waiting sometimes 2 years to get a letter saying when their date for diagnostic laparoscopy would be, which is really shocking for the NHS. And I think that one of the challenges that I think face the NHS, and we now know what the issues are with COVID, obviously, is that from my perspective, there's been an undercapacity of planning of what is needed to support those with endometriosis. The reason it takes an awful long time to get a laparoscopy, maybe a couple of years, isn't because nobody can do them. It's because there's so few scheduled slots that only a few people can be put in them. So I think one of our calls for the NHS in Northern Ireland is to consider what the actual capacity is of those with endometriosis and plan to meet those needs. And what is very positive is that the Health Minister has said that they are doing some work to identify who exactly is on the lists and how many people do have endometriosis awaiting, so they can maybe start looking at that. Data sounds really boring, but without data, things don't move. So you need to plan that. And so I think that's a really positive step forward. Certainly before, as I say, even before the pandemic, people were, about 60% of people were waiting more than 6 months for surgery for endometriosis. And that was double what the average was in the UK. So we do want to ensure that something happens. And of course, pandemic has made things worse. So unfortunately, we do know there's long waiting lists. And I think one of our roles at Endometriosis UK is how can we support healthcare practitioners, and we've been working with the Royal College of GPs and others to try and provide information to support people going forward. So I think there is an issue about the access to gynecological care. And when we talk about endometriosis, and we've talked about specialist centres, and Sorcha has spoken about those, is just to talk about that. So endometriosis, I think we all know it's quite complicated, isn't it, in how things work, and we know it's a spectrum condition, and for some people they have a quick time to diagnosis and they respond really well to hormone treatments, others don't. We know that the level of severity of disease doesn't necessarily, is based on where it's growing, not necessarily how much you have, and the symptoms can be unique to each person. But the thing for me is that, you know, if you've got endometriosis, especially if you've got deep endometriosis, as they call it, on your other organs, you want to see a specialist, don't you? You want to see someone who's like really good at what they're doing. And so the BSG, the British Society for Gynecological Endoscopy, everything in endometriosis has unpronounceable names, so I'll call them the BSG from now on. The BSG several years ago looked at making sure they could accredit specialist centres. So this was about setting up specialist endometriosis centres. Virtual, they weren't big buildings, they were groups of teams that would work together on certain days in hospitals, and they would pull together all the different specialities that were needed. And that might be colorectal surgeons as well as gynecological surgeons, it would be specialist nurses, pain management. And now, prior to the pandemic, in Northern Ireland, there was a specialist centre, and there's also one centre that was provisional. So you have to obviously prove that you're good enough to become a full centre. Unfortunately, during the pandemic and with staff changing, currently there is no specialist centre in Northern Ireland, and there is one still pending, so one provisional centre. Now, the health minister has said that they are looking to recruit to ensure that they can get back up to having 2 specialist centres. It's about finding the right person to do that. But I think there is an issue at the moment about those with endometriosis, is ensuring that they can get the right care and good quality care that they need for the level of disease they have. And I think that's an issue across the whole of Northern Ireland at the moment. I don't want to be too negative. I know people are working hard. I know the provisional centre is looking to do what it can, but there is an issue about accessing what we call specialist care at the moment. And so part of that is then saying, well, you know, all the gynecologists that don't work in specialist care, let's make sure they're getting the training and resources they need, they're getting the information. As Sorcha said, they know what the symptoms are, they can help diagnose. So there's a whole host of work, I think, there to support our healthcare practitioner colleagues to get the information they need. And I think certainly we do know that that accessing care at the moment is challenging, and I do hope that we see some improvements, and we'll be very much following up and chasing that. In fact, Rebecca, who's our policy manager, at least twice a week tries to find out what's going on with those sorts of things, and we will see what we can do to help push that away. And in terms of what change can there be, I think, you know, today is the start of Endometriosis Action Month, March. It's always been Awareness Month, and we decided to ditch Awareness Month and have Action Month. Now, awareness is massively important for endometriosis, but so is action. And we want awareness raising to be just one of the actions that we do going forward. And I think for our actions that we'd like to see in Northern Ireland are, I'll go through those 4 key ones that we want to see. We want to see a baseline of endometriosis care for all, so that everyone gets the minimum standard of care, which is a good standard, good baseline, that the NICE guidelines that are adopted, so they set out the pathway that endometriosis care should follow. So we believe that everyone should have a baseline of care that's on the NICE guidelines. We want to see much faster diagnosis. So the average in the UK to get a diagnosis is 8 years. In the Northern Ireland, it's 8.5 years. And we want to see that halved by 2025 and to be under a year or less by 2030. Now, that might seem like a long time. I know 8 years sounds like a long time, but it's a big job. That average diagnosis time that people couldn't actually, you know, it hasn't changed in a decade. So we are going to be looking at how we can encourage people to do that. And what's been really promising in Scotland is that the Scottish Government have made a commitment to get that diagnosis time right down to under a year or less as soon as they can. And so that's really promising to see. So we also want to see in Northern Ireland specifically the tackling of the pandemic backlog, so to make sure there's enough resources so those in gynecology aren't left behind, but are taken forward too, where they have due priority. One thing we've found across the UK is it's the gynecology waiting lists that are growing more than any other waiting list, and we don't think that's acceptable. We don't want to see that happen. And then fourth area we specifically want to see in Northern Ireland is to have menstrual wellbeing and education included within the school curriculum. We believe it's really important that we gradually, well, not gradually, but quickly overcome the taboos about talking about periods, and also that we ensure all children have the right knowledge and language to understand what's happening with their body and to seek help if they need it. We believe it should be done in schools because we want it to be done in an age-appropriate way that doesn't scare anybody, that doesn't, the last thing we would want to do is scare anyone about having periods, but actually gives children age-appropriate and adolescents age-appropriate information so they can know what a normal period is and they know when to seek help if they don't have that. So we will be launching later this month action to get people to write to their MLAs and also to their MPs on a whole range of things, and watch out on our social media for that. Now, I am being told we have a slight technical hitch, I'm afraid. For some reason, our Q&A, our chat function, sorry, isn't working. I do apologise about that. Let me have a look. So if you would like to ask questions, and I do apologise, could you please email us at policy@endometriosis-uk.org. I do apologise about that. We are seeing if we can get the chat switched on. Please do let me know if there's anything you want to say on that one. Please do email us as well. Great, and questions are coming through on email. Thank you very much for that one. Oh, sorry about that. Just in summary, it's the beginning of Action Month. We want to see action in Northern Ireland as well as across the UK to improve endometriosis support and care. We're really keen to see specialist support for those that need it, but everybody should have access to the care and the level of care they need. So we're really looking forward to working with people in Northern Ireland and with all the decision makers to make sure that we can try and achieve change. Anyway, I think that's enough from me. Look out for what we'll be doing in the Write to Your MLA campaign soon. But I'd like to hand over to Caroline now, who's going to give us Caroline Mccormack, who's going to give us her view of endometriosis from a perspective of someone living within the endometriosis community in Northern Ireland. Caroline.
Hi everyone, thank you very much for inviting me along tonight to speak to everybody. My personal journey with endometriosis started when I was 15 years old, and much the same as everybody else's story, started at school whenever your period started, and they're so horrendously bad, and you don't know what's wrong. And again, the same journey as everybody else, going to the GP numerous times, being put on the pill then to try and relieve the symptoms a wee bit. And then I suppose very much years passed by as you were on the pill, and it wasn't until then, sort of my mid-20s, when I started to come off, that the endometriosis symptoms got so bad that still at that stage I didn't know that's what I had. Again, backwards and forwards to the GP. Told you have IBS and you're just unlucky. It's sort of the same story that everybody has heard. And then eventually through fertility side of things was how I got my diagnostic laparoscopy, which then diagnosed the endometriosis. That had actually taken me 15 years of living with it before I was actually properly diagnosed. And then, I spent many years again, sort of, well, with fertility then, and I was lucky enough to be able to have my daughter. And it was then through Endo UK that I was put in touch with the Belfast support group, which was probably the same year of my diagnosis back in 2009. And I've been going to the support group ever since, and found it has been invaluable to me. Just to be able to be around other girls that are sharing a similar journey or who have been down that same path that you're now traveling, be able to hear their stories and be able to, you know, just have somewhere in confidence that you can go and talk and feel supported. Because I know sometimes maybe family and work, you feel like you're burdening them maybe all the time when you're constantly complaining. So it was great, you know, to have that outlet, to be able to share with others. And now I have obviously had my daughter and so on, and I'm back sort of trying to muddle my way through the health system again for my next treatment or whatever that's going to be. But the same as everybody else with COVID, that has been greatly delayed as well. So I think that's sort of where we are with things. We're all asking the same questions as to waiting lists and are so bad. Questions that we would be getting from girls all the time would be, you know, when will surgeries resume again? What moving forward, what is the plan? And, you know, a lot of girls are having to go privately. And, you know, it's so expensive for everybody if you aren't fortunate enough to have private healthcare insurance with your employer or anything like that. Trying to gather up the money to go for a surgery just so you can have a reasonable quality of life and be able to work, which is ultimately the position some girls are in. They're unable to work because of their endo, and you know, so it's really having quite an effect on girls at the moment here in Northern Ireland. And that's what we would really like to see moving forward, is a plan of some sort. Thank you.
That's great, Caroline. And I hear that really loud and clear from a lot of people in terms of what's the plan, I think, going forward. And I think what I find interesting is, I don't know what it's like, is are people being updated with what's going on, or are they just left in the dark? Because I think that's one of the things, isn't it? You don't know if are you still on the list? Have you dropped off a list?
Yeah, there's very little. I mean, my personal experience, so I was put on the list probably back in 2019, so it was pre-COVID. And then I was due to be seen when COVID obviously arrived, and then that was delayed. I then did get an appointment and was able to be seen in the Belfast Trust. And that would have been probably March. But then even your review appointments, you're not, I thought it was to happen by telephone. They're not even happening, you know, and, you know, then you sort of don't know, well, where am I? What's happening now? Because my review appointment hasn't happened either. So it's all very disjointed and broken. And, you know, for myself, who has been in the system for quite a while, I suppose, but for new girls who are just coming through and needing to get a diagnosis and so on, they really do feel they don't know where they are, they don't know what's happening, they don't know who to go to, they don't know who the GP should be making the referral to. It all just seems very disjointed at present. And yeah, it's hard for us now to even know what to say to girls, because we don't really know either, because we haven't really had much contact, I suppose, with health as we would have had pre-COVID. You know, we would have been fairly up to date with what was going on in each trust area.
Yeah, and it's something, I don't know if Sorcia might have a view as well, and we kindly shared that thought she was on the diagnosis process. I do worry about all those people who've not been able to get a diagnosis or see anyone over the last 2 years. And I think, you know, it is interesting to find out. I don't know, it feels to me like if it could be streamlined, it would save everybody time, not to mention heartache and not knowing and things like that. I don't know if Caroline or Sorcia, either of you have a view on that.
Yeah, I mean, it would feel that girls end up maybe referred to maybe, I mean, I don't know, general gynecology, and then when they find that it's an endometriosis patient, they want it referred to the endometriosis specialist. So yes, there is an element of, you know, I suppose time being wasted where there isn't that triage system. I don't know, there isn't a system there in place, you know, to try and help with that.
Yeah, I suppose just to echo some of what Caroline has said, and thank you so much, Caroline, for sharing and everything you've done in terms of just, you know, contributing and helping others. one thing that I was thinking that we haven't explicitly mentioned that I should have and I forgot is the issue of mental health, because it does really impact on you. And it was only whenever Caroline had said, oh, you feel like you're burdening people because you're complaining. I took a picture of myself last week, and I had my endo belly was flaring up. And yes, like everybody else, I've gained a bit of weight during COVID and all the rest of it. But anybody familiar with endo belly, that's not what that is. It's incredibly debilitating. And if you're in a position where you're having to go out or be seen, and people do comment, now no one's ever said anything to me, but I'm sure if anyone had seen me at that time, I just covered up well, because there are so many fertility issues with people who do have endo. Sometimes whenever you do have an endo belly flare up, it can result in something that, you know, is cruel in a way, because people maybe make an assumption or whatever, because of how you look. And I actually had said to people, I'm going to put this photo up on my social media later and make a point of it, because, you know, you do want to say this is actually part of what this means. It is not just, you know, your reproductive organs, it's your bowel, it's, you know, your bladder, and it's something that I have even struggled to come to terms with in terms of the enormity, and trying to digest that whenever you're in pain, on a fairly constant, regular basis, as well as the impact that it has on your hormones, and your ability to self-regulate, even your metabolism. You know, that might sound a bit silly, but, you know, it's another thing that you don't really have full control over. And it is very difficult to deal with. And I think what struck me is that the amount of women that I have come across who have been told in the past, and obviously nobody would do this now, but it has obviously impacted on them, where they've been told, oh, are you sure? Or they have looked and requested records, and none of their queries about any of this has been on the records. And it's just because people didn't know how to deal with it or approach it many years ago, but they're still living with that stigma, I suppose, in a way, where they felt that they weren't really listened to. So, you know, thank goodness for people like Caroline and the support group, who are there to support others, but the people who are, you know, putting forward that that journey and saying, look, it isn't in your mind, you know, you aren't going mad. Yeah, I just think the mental health impact is really important as well to mention.
Yeah, I think you're completely right, Saoirse. And I think the other thing that we hear a lot is that, because, you know, the average long time to diagnosis is people are quite often told it's in their head, and they sort of get to their stage where is it something I'm making up or not? And that, you know, knowing it isn't, is not what they're making up. And I think that can also have a big impact on people. And one of the things that we're keen to see is very much more mental health support, to join up and provide services, as you do for many other chronic conditions. It feels like that although endometriosis is a chronic, long-term chronic pain condition, it's just not treated in the same way as other similar, you know, conditions with similar prevalence, and we want that to change. I don't know, Caroline, if you've had much experience of people. I mean, the support group does this a fantastic opportunity for people to get support, isn't it?
It is, yeah. And I mean, we are hoping, so obviously with COVID, unfortunately, we haven't had any of our face-to-face meetings, but we are hoping, we're currently sourcing, hopefully, a venue to get up and running, so that we can start, you know, hopefully having some face-to-face meetings and get our online groups sort of up and running well again. Because, yeah, there are so many girls out there that are just feeling a bit lost in the system, I think, and don't know what to do.
Yeah, we've got some questions coming in, so I'll just start with some of those. Is that okay? And one thing that's actually been touched on already is around improving follow-up care after surgery, and we've got a couple of questions around sort of the process of care. So I think one of the challenges around follow-up care after surgery is there's something that really bugs me about how care is done across the UK, which is, and I don't know, Caroline and Saoirse, if you've had surgeries, when you're in recovery room, usually quite out of it, someone tells you what's happened, and you quite often don't remember. Is that, Caroline, You're laughing, so I'm presuming you've had that?
Oh yes, yes. And then you think, did I dream that, or was that just, was I still knocked out? Did I imagine what was said, or was it right or wrong or whatever? Yeah.
I'd like to say this is for like everyone who has surgery. It's not to do with endometriosis. And I just find it gobsmacking that people aren't handed their discharge letters with all that in. So just so you know, everybody, if you've there is a discharge letter done. So if you don't remember what you were told in recovery, or do ask your GP for a copy. That's my top tip at the moment.
Okay.
I think for me, there's a whole, we've got lots of questions around, how do we improve follow-up care for, what can be done to reduce the backlog, how do we get support? And I think for me, it's what we touched on earlier, which is there's something around, there is what they call the NICE guideline, the National Institute of Clinical Health Excellence guideline. It's been adopted in Northern Ireland, and it gives a nice flow of what's supposed to happen. And actually, if we could, if you like, stop and take breath and get that implemented, it would streamline what is going forward. The challenge we have at the moment is that there isn't any specialist care, which is part of that process. Someone's asked if can patients from Northern Ireland go to the NHS in England or the Republic of Ireland? And Sorcha, again, you might know a bit more about this. One thing I do know is that pre-COVID, and when the UK was in the EU, is that the Irish patients would come to England for their treatment, and now they're having to go elsewhere. So I don't know, Sorcha, do you know much about the over the cross-border referrals?
Yeah, I mean, this is something that has come up locally, but it's also been referred to at the APPG in Westminster as well, where, as you say, there is that reciprocal healthcare now, by and large, for the most part, in terms of other areas of clinical work, in terms of Northern Ireland and Dublin and Derry. Sorry, I have somebody in here that I should have taken out of the room before I started the Zoom. Yeah, I mean, there is an element there where that reciprocation has still been able to carry on in certain other areas. I think the issue for us in Northern Ireland is that we don't have that BCGE anymore, and that window was only very slight whenever that was operating. So I think that's the first hurdle that we have to get over, as well as that supplementing that, I think, those BPCs, those centres where scopes can be done. I mean, prior to the assembly getting back up and running again, and hopefully somebody can correct me on this if I'm wrong, but I do remember some of the conversations that we had as part of the talks team to NDNA, New Decade, New Approach, which was the foundation on which the assembly was forward, where it referred to waiting times. Obviously that referred to all specialisms, but there had been an attempt prior to COVID to put a marker down to say, look, if you haven't been seen and you've been on a waiting list for X amount of years at this point. And I think that's the issue. You sort of touched on it earlier, Emma, where if you are on a waiting list, do you have a way of almost checking to see where you are? Like some of the people I've worked with who are general practitioners working in primary care have said that they have gone through, or at least attempted on their own steam, to go through some of their waiting lists to see where people are. Some people have dropped off, as Caroline has alluded to. Some people have been able to access private healthcare, which obviously is a huge inequity in the system and something nobody would be happy with in terms of people who are, priced out of accessing help, which isn't right at all. But there are conversations ongoing that have been committed to at Westminster and also with colleagues in the South as well. So that's something we'll carry on doing. But I do think that people in Northern Ireland do deserve that centre to be accredited. And I know that work is ongoing, and certainly everyone's absolutely committed to that from the health side. So there's no issue there. But hopefully that sort of gives some of a flavour as to what we're certainly trying to push for.
And I think we're having a few questions picking up on the points that you've made around private healthcare. We've had a few questions about that, and also about people who've had to travel outside of Northern Ireland to get treatment and they've had to pay for themselves. And I do think, we end up with this really bad system, don't we, where like if you can afford it, you can, get care. And I certainly spoke to people who can't afford it but have taken out loans or, whatever it might got into debt. because they just can't cope without the treatment they need. And I think that's as we, you know, when we launch our letter writing campaign to MLAs and to MPs, I think if those in power hear the stories of people and get lots of letters, they do take note. And as Sorcha said, you know, there's an all-party parliamentary group in the Westminster Parliament that covers the UK. There's also other things happening in Northern Ireland, and I think that we have to work out how we can shout to make sure that those with endometriosis get due priority compared to others as well. One of the questions was, can't the NHS use private facilities to clear some of the backlog as they do in other areas of healthcare? Now, I do not know the situation for each part of the country, but it is something that is being used in some parts of the UK. But I think that's something that we'll have to find out what the position is in Northern Ireland, unless Caroline or Sorcha know about that.
Yeah, I'm not sure. I suppose my thing just on discussing this topic is for the girls that have that very severe endometriosis, where even maybe the private healthcare can't cover that, because the girls with that really severe stage who maybe need urology, colorectal there, those surgeries still need to happen under the National Health and in the National Health hospitals. I don't know that any of the private facilities are able to treat those complex girls who need that really complex treatment. And they're the ones that are really, really needing, you know, a plan and surgeries to start and something to be available in Northern Ireland for them.
Absolutely.
Yeah, I just want to chime in and echo what Caroline said there, where although there is an inequity in the system which none of us are happy with, that isn't sustainable and needs addressed, even that private element will only take you so far. And I think fundamentally, yes, we do need to have the accredited centre here, but although this isn't just an endo issue, we do have an issue where we need to staff our health and social care in Northern Ireland appropriately. And that will involve long-term investment in actually investing in our health and social care professionals. And the other thing that's kind of struck me as well, and I think my colleague Paula Bradshaw, MLA, is listening as well, who released a health paper yesterday on behalf of our party, which looks to address some of these issues, which is available on the party website, is the issue of, you know, how do we actually deal with some of the issues that are presented in health in a way that is done through a lens that isn't just solely through health. So what do I mean by that? So for example, some of the lower level interventions that can be made around supporting mental health or the health groups. I know people who have gone to the group that Caroline is in, and that has been a real lifeline for them. Obviously, that's not a physical intervention, but that is still nonetheless very important. But whenever we look at some of the things that we've suggested, is the likes of MOTs for women or new mothers. And if they're done on a regular basis, there's more chance of picking up conditions that people may not even know that they had. And if that's done, they can be treated earlier. What I tend to find is that constituents, whenever they come with these issues around endometriosis, haven't been diagnosed, or and that's through no fault of their own. But the longer it goes on, the more chance there is of other comorbidities developing that can go unchecked and can also lead in problems as well. So I think that kind of looking at a model where, yes, we have the DPCs, the mega clinics and an accredited centre, but also where we look to other ways with which we're tackling these issues, not just through a single element of, you know, one place. It needs to be, you know, a community of support that's available there for people.
Absolutely. Moving on slightly, we've had several questions around about, which I'm going to sort of summarise as, how do we get doctors to know more about endometriosis and to take it seriously and to recognise the symptoms? And I think there's, you know, recognition that if we don't have, you know, someone's put, what do we do when GPs and general gynecologists don't want to deal with someone so complicated? And I think that really that's a job that hopefully we can all try and work at. But one of the things that we will commit to Endometriosis UK is we've been doing some work with the Royal College of GPs over the last few years, and having trained, you know, there's doing a menstrual wellbeing toolkit, and there's a short 30-minute e-learning module for GPs, and there's various other trainings as well. And so we'll certainly liaise with the NHS in Northern Ireland and see if we can get that promoted to GPs, and I think also look at how we can work with the Royal College of Obstetricians and Gynecologists, the RCOG, in Northern Ireland, about how their general staff, the general gynecologists, can support those with endometriosis and the awareness. There's I talked about the NICE guidelines, and I think with the NICE guidelines, that's called the NICE quality standards, and they say very simply that all healthcare practitioners should know the signs and symptoms of endometriosis and suspect it with one or more of the key symptoms. Wouldn't that be nice going forward? It's quite a simple thing, but I think if we can break down some of these things into quite hopefully manageable chunks, that as the NHS recovers, as we go through after COVID, let's look at some ways that aren't particularly high cost, but we can reach people going forward with that. One of the questions I'm going to ask Saoirse this for her views is as some people might know, is there have been in Scotland have produced a women's health plan. England is producing a women's health plan. They got halfway. They've done a vision for the strategy, but not the strategy itself. And we're part of a coalition of a large number of women's health groups in Wales who are presenting our proposal to the Welsh Government, and I hope they'll do a women's health plan. And I suppose one of the questions is, what can we do to get a women's health plan or similar for Northern Ireland? Have you got any suggestions on that, Saoirse?
Yeah, absolutely. And basically what has happened in Northern Ireland is that there is obviously various all-party groups set up, but there has been an all-party group recently discussing the issue of women's health specifically, not just in relation to this, but all sorts of other issues. We as a party have also called for a women's health strategy, and that's detailed on our paper that we released yesterday. I think that takes in so many issues, because generally if you have endo, you will potentially have some mental health issues coming on from that. You may also have bowel issues or whatever it may be, fertility issues, and that can all be looked at in a holistic way, rather than just these interventions that may look to try and address some of the problems. But if you're looking at a patient or someone in front of you as a whole series of disjointed things, ultimately that outcome isn't going to be the best for that person. So I think if it was done in that way, where it was much more holistic and taken in the round, that's certainly something we as a party have been calling for in terms of driving forward what that looks like for people on the ground. So a women's health strategy, absolutely. And I think that's really important. And I think it links a lot to perinatal and postnatal health too, because as Caroline said, a lot of women only really discover whenever they're starting their fertility journey that they actually may have endo, and to what extent that's impacted on them. So I think if that's done around, that's something that we'd certainly love to see in Northern Ireland. And as I say, it deals with those sorts of issues in the round, and as a collective, rather than these kind of separate interventions that are a bit disjointed.
Yeah, that's great. And I think, the one of the things that's I think really great about the Scottish Health Plan, I really like the Scottish Women's Health Plan, but I'm a bit biased because I was involved in some parts of it. They've taken on board the need to reduce diagnosis time. But what's great is doing what they take as a life course approach, and exactly what Saoirse is saying is it's not about looking at little chunks of just things, but actually saying from the perspective of the person going through that journey, what's it like? And I don't know, Caroline, if you hear of people, do you get a feeling it is quite disjointed, the care people have at the moment, rather than joining up and helping them in ways they want?
Yeah, I mean, certainly, yes, I would feel it's very disjointed. You have girls being told, that their endo is all in their head, or GPs not being very supportive of some of the stories we hear. Then when girls are diagnosed, it's some of them, maybe referrals to pain clinics would be, helpful to girls, but that doesn't seem to happen unless you're proactive yourself and, asking for a referral there. So yeah, there's lots of areas where it's very disjointed. And it would be nice to see it.
Sorry, Caroline, I get really annoyed about the whole pain thing, because about pain clinics, because there are pain clinics, all over, and I don't understand why those with endometriosis pain aren't regularly referred to them. I mean, why is pain? Why is pain in one part of your body just seem to, well, that's normal, whereas in other parts of your body is? I can rant, so I won't do. We had a question about pelvic physio, another of my rants, and you know, there's this thing, isn't there, that, you know, if I don't know, if I pulled my knee playing rugby, luckily I don't play rugby anymore, you know, I'd get physio.
Yeah.
But I might have some issues, you know, if I have issues that are linked to my vagina or womb, why don't I get physio for that as an early intervention? And when we do speak to people who do have women's health physio, including internal women's health physio, which is a sort of not very British, shall we say, it's more common in other parts of the world, you hear some amazing things, and you think, well, you know, if I've got scar tissue somewhere, why wouldn't I have physio to do it? I certainly have had it on my shoulder, why wouldn't I have it somewhere else? And I think there is something we need to try and do as a society, which is step back and recognise that the vagina and the womb are completely normal organs. They're quite special organs, actually. They're quite impressive, do an awful lot of things. And how is it we can just get over ourselves and treat them in a way that we would other parts of the body? I know we can't see them, but we treat other parts of the body we can't see with physio or with a whole range of other things. So I can rant about this for ages.
I think it's you know, girls being able to, you know, manage their symptoms, and sometimes if surgery isn't right, it's, well, what other options are available? Because unless you are sort of doing your own research, or in, I suppose, our groups and things like that, you're not finding out about the other, you know, things that are available to help you manage your symptoms, to help you keep working, to help you keep going, and things like that.
No, definitely. And I think there's you know, I think there's been so little research. I think it's something like I think it's last year, I've got this out, but you know, in the last year, something only like 2.1% of research from the main research body in the UK has gone on women's health. And that, let alone the tiny share of that that's come to endometriosis. And due to the fact there's been so little research, we know that we don't know enough about the disease. We don't have a simple diagnostic test, unfortunately. I think there are opportunities if we can get the funding. I think there's some quite exciting stuff happening for the future around people who can do, where scanning is getting more detailed. Just to be clear, you can't rule out endometriosis if you have a normal scan, but where you get a really good scanning kit and really good professional, you know, people are very well trained, they can pick up things that others can't. So I think there's a whole range of things we can look at going through on that one. Just moving on slightly. Oh, sorry, I need varifocals, so do bear with me just one moment while I try and read something like that. So we've been asked a question, and Caroline, I'm going to come to you for this one, which is there a virtual support group in Belfast or Northern Ireland?
Well, there hasn't been for a wee while, but yes, we are in the process of getting ourselves sort of up and running again, and we will be looking to have some online support, because some of the feedback that we've got back is that some girls would prefer that, and then some girls prefer face-to-face. So we think we're going to try and offer both. So hopefully we can accommodate you know, any girls then.
So we've, as Endometriosis UK, we've always done some virtual support groups because people can't always travel. And the technology's got a lot better in the last 2 years than it was before, and cheaper. But I think, you know, what we're hearing is all over the UK, is just as Caroline's saying, is some people find virtual helpful, some people would like face-to-face. And I think that, you know, we recognise that sometimes people can't travel for a whole host of reasons. And so certainly we'll be working with Caroline to see what we can do in terms of providing a mix of opportunities to get support for people. Moving on. One of the questions quite specific is, and there's been a few questions around follow-up care after surgery, which I'm guessing is an issue because there's been a few questions on that. And one of the questions is, two parts, is what can we do to educate local hospitals? And also that many women are sent home and sort of told off with showing up with period issues and they're not taken seriously. I don't know, maybe start with Saoirse, if you've got any ideas about how can we, I mean, obviously we're trying to do this with events like this, but how can we get endometriosis and period issues taken more seriously, do you think?
Well, I think it's you know, basically giving people to be aware, and that goes for the health and social care family as much as anything else. And I know you'll probably hear bits about how, the likes of No More Silos, for example, which is a long-term strategy within the health service trusts here, where the way of looking at people or the way of approaching various health policy issues is done in the round, or at least there's a recognition that it needs to be done in the round. And I don't think anyone disputes that, and I do think that is more or less at the core of what is being done at the minute through our health service. But in practice, what does that mean? And as you say, what's a quick, low-cost intervention? Well, it's making sure that everybody is trained on these issues. So, for example, if you look at sepsis, and I'm maybe not sure if that's the right analogy, but if you look at that issue, that has gained a lot of prominence through people who have shared their story, and only for that kind of training that people were aware of to spot the signs. And I suppose that's a direct read across in terms of looking at how we raise that awareness within the health family. But if you're specifically recovering from surgery, obviously, yes, sepsis is one of those things that can happen at any time. I didn't intend to use that, but yes, I suppose that's also relevant. But in terms of just, the recuperation required, you mentioned physio, that's also really important. And again, that will involve, a multidisciplinary approach where it won't just be somebody checking on dressings or, internal examinations. It will be someone looking at, your general mobility. And I would like to think that, that kind of linkage between somebody who is your consultant or your surgeon that you're in the care of and a physio would be coordinated in that way. And I think that's as much something that everyone agrees on as an end goal. I think the challenge is that we need to have, as you say, more people who are brought into the service. And I used to work in the health service very briefly over 10 years ago. And I know it's difficult to get people and then recruited, especially for these kinds of speciality services. But I think if there's that commitment, that there will be an acknowledgement that this will be a long-term potentially recuperation. And I think as well, it's maybe not one for legislation, but if you look at some of the things that people have legislated around in terms of different types of leave and stuff like that, I also used to work in HR and very much can see the employment perspective as well, where I have come across some women that have been, felt like they've been forced back into work too early, if that makes sense. And there hasn't been enough of an understanding that they have perhaps gone not just, a scope, but, other potential heavy surgery. And I know a few girls who have gone in and things maybe haven't gone exactly to plan, and they have required a lot of time to recover from that. And it's interesting, one of the last things I spoke on about women's health was at a Zoom like this. And I had said at the start that whenever I had gone for my initial consultations and stuff, I was working in a shift work job in a very kind of heavy retail environment, operating in a warehouse. And I just couldn't have put myself in a position where I was off my feet, because I would have been scared of losing a job or being sanctioned. So, I think, and that was only, 15 years ago, 16, 17 years ago. So, I think there's a lot of education, not just within the health realm, but other partners, who will be there. So the likes of employers, the likes of, family members, the likes of maybe, for example, people who do work in primary care, so that there's a holistic approach.
Yeah, and we've launched an endometriosis friendly employer scheme because we have so many people saying those points about employment. Now we're nearly at the end of time, but Caroline, I just wondered if there's anything just before we wrap up in an entire minute, anything you wanted to add about how you'd like to see support develop in Northern Ireland?
Yeah, well, I suppose just following on from the after, people asking about sort of their after surgery and things like that. I mean, a lot of questions that we would see coming through as well to us is, what to expect after your surgery, and when it's maybe they feel that it's not going the way it should, what do they do? where do they go? How do they get seen again, or where do they go to for advice? I don't know if we can utilise more our endo. I know there was an endo nurse in the Belfast Trust, and I'm not sure, is that a role for her? I don't know. I'm
tell you
just
what,
putting
we
that
can.
out there.
Well, Caroline and I, after, not now, but after this, we'll have a chat and see if there's anything we can get out. So if we can get some guidance, so at least people know who to call and what to do and things like that. It is 7 o'clock, and I promised I would finish on time. So I'd like to say a very massive thank you to Caroline and Sorcha for their time today. I realise it's not necessarily the most uplifting topic when we're talking about what is missing in Northern Ireland, but I think it is very promising that the Minister wrote to us today as he couldn't come, and we are seeing commitment to try and make things better. It might take slightly longer than any of us on this call would like, but certainly we'll be campaigning and pushing for that. So thank you, Caroline, thank you, Sorcha, and thank you to everyone else. And do watch out when we launch our letter writing campaign to MLAs and MPs, and have your say in that as well. Thank you very much, and good night, everyone.